Thanks for listening to the Mornings with Carmen LaBerge podcast, made available thanks to support from listeners just like you.
Inspiring you to bring God back into the conversation of the day. This is Mornings with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms held wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power, we will go. By your spirit, we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Well, good morning again. This is hour 2 of Mornings with Carmen. The war that began on October the 7th when Hamas terrorists crossed the border into the state of Israel and butchered 1,400 men, women, and children in unspeakable acts, and then took 240 additional people hostage into the Gaza Strip. That war has reached an important moment. Israeli forces raided the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. The hospital was being used as, or by Hamas as a cover and a shield for its terrorist operations. The Israelis brought medical teams and supplies with them. They have now withdrawn from the hospital as the IDF proceeds to eliminate Hamas terrorists from Gaza. The goal being to make it so there would not be the possibility of Hamas terrorists ever attacking Israel in the same way that they did on October the 7th. So that's the first sort of military operational goal. There's obviously also the goal of finding and securing the release of the hostages. That's an ongoing conversation you'll hear about in the news as well. And then there is the humanitarian crisis unfolding because obviously there are people in the hospital, patients, doctors, medical personnel, Gazans who sought refuge in the hospital complex, which is some 11 acres in the middle of Gaza City, as the war required them to evacuate from their homes throughout the city. So it's complex. We have been talking now for a month about the reality that war is hell, and we should be prepared for all kinds of things to take place, all of which are regrettable, but all of which are also the responsibility of the Hamas terrorists. And now the use of the civilian population in Gaza as a shield. So here in the United States, the war in the Holy Land has revealed serious and deep divisions. You are very, very aware and familiar with the rise in anti-Semitic speech on social media platforms, the rise in anti-Semitic speech and action, hate and violence against students on college campuses, and worse. There are protests, there are counter-protests. In North Andover, the town of North Andover officially raised the Palestinian flag on the town common after a very passionate debate. That came after North Andover had raised the Israeli flag. And so I do think that when we talk about flags and the flags we fly and the American flag flying, over your town, and then what flags you fly under the American flag in the town common. The conversation in North Andover, Massachusetts is actually a really, really interesting one for us to consider in terms of ongoing conversations about all the flags that people would have us be flying alongside or under the Israeli flag. Just to bring you up to date, over the weekend, hundreds of thousands gathered in D.C. to demonstrate support for Israel and the Jewish people. Last night, the U.S. Senate actually failed to pass an aid package that had been sent over from the House. Now, to be fair, the Senate had said in advance that this was not a proposal that they wanted to take up because they did not want to see it defeated. But a group of conservative members of the Senate brought the item of business to the floor. And because it did not include funding for Ukraine and because it was offset by a reduction to the budget for the IRS, the Senate did not pass this aid package. But I do not think we should imagine that that means that the United States does not substantively support Israel in this ongoing war. There is a new Reuters Ipsos poll that shows that U.S. public support for the war is eroding. A majority of Americans think that a ceasefire is in order as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has ballooned. So where are you on that? Should the U.S. be a neutral mediator? That's what nearly 40% of Americans believe. 32% said the U.S. should support Israel. 4% said the U.S. should support the Palestinians, and 15 to the exclusion of Israel. And 15% said the U.S. should not be involved at all. Where are you in terms of what is unfolding in the Middle East? Love to hear from you from time to time on this. How are you praying? For whom are you concerned? I am praying for the hostages and their families. I am praying for the grieving on all sides, the thousands of families on both sides of this who have now lost loved ones. I am praying for justice. I am praying for the peace of Jerusalem. I am praying for God to use what others meant for evil for his good purposes. I think we must remind ourselves this did not begin on October the 7th, 2023, and it is not going to end anytime soon. This is a long conflict with deeply religious and historic roots, and we should brace ourselves for this to take a long time to be resolved. So reconciliation is obviously what we desire in our hearts. We recognize that those who are reconciled to God in Christ Jesus are then reconciled to themselves and to one another. And so that is my hope as a minister of reconciliation in the world today. We're going to have Rabbi Steve Weil join us next. He is the CEO of the Friends of Israel Defense Forces. This is the American support arm for the Israeli, for the IDF. And so we're going to talk with him about what is happening on the ground, what he's hearing, and how we can help. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. We're joined by Rabbi Steve Weil. He is the CEO of the Friends of Israel Defense Forces. Rabbi Weil, welcome to Mornings with Carmen.
It's a great honor to be with you, Carmen.
I would like to begin, if we can, by just asking you what it feels like to be a Jew right now in America.
Well, we're going back to the historical norm. You know, for the last 40, 50 years, I don't think the Jews have ever had that positive an experience, being a refugee people, being a minority in another country. And I think what happened was a number of Jews became spoiled and didn't realize that, they're looked at as another, they're treated differently. Their morals, their value system, the biblical value system is very threatening to a lot of people out there.
One of the challenges that I'll confess that I face in the ongoing conversations that we're seeking to have is that not everyone who is a Jew is the same kind of Jew. And so, like, when you talk about having biblical values or living by biblical norms, there are people who are secular in their Judaism. Can you walk me around a little bit in that? Because I have found it difficult to even know what to say to my very secular Jewish friends. I have not found it hard to find words and to grieve with and walk in solidarity with my more religious Jewish friends. Maybe that's just me, but can you help me?
It's true. I mean, you have a situation it's true in the Christian world, it's true in the Muslim world, where there's no such thing as a typical Jew, a typical Muslim, a typical Christian. And what's happened in America, and a lot of that is the function that they were just planted from Europe. They'd been in Europe for 1,000 years. They had the institutions, educational institutions, communal institutions that gave them a sense of rootedness. When they came to America, the families were just trying to earn a living and trying to be able to put food on the table, educate their children. And after 2-3 generations of not having that infrastructure, many of these Jewish people ultimately became great Americans. They did not become sophisticated Jews, thoughtful Jews in terms of their understanding of Jewish values, Jewish education, etc. And for those Jews who really defined themselves as an American, very loyal American, to a great degree, their world has crumbled underneath them. There's been an earthquake in their world because especially those whose tendencies is more to the progressive side or the liberal side, that world has turned on them, be it academia, be it the media, be it the culture of many of the places where they work. And in my opinion, it's an opportunity for them to take a step back and say, who are you? What are you? What defined your family for thousands of years? What defined your history for thousands of years? And that, of course, are the axioms and postulates that are rooted in biblical values. What we say in Hebrew, the mitzvahs bein adam lechavero, the very ethical, moral principles of how to conduct oneself in business, how to act as a neighbor, how to treat the elderly, how to deal with one's wealth, with one's time, etc. And maybe they'll recalibrate and understand that the world that they embraced has turned on them.
That is that living as a distinctive people in the midst of whatever people you happen to live in the midst of. And so then when we think of Israel, when you think of Israel, let me do it that way. When you think of Israel, like what does your heart say to you? What do you want me to know about Israel?
Israel every day is a miracle from God. I mean, you've got Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Circassians, from 85 different countries. It's a land that literally has been an ingathering of the exiles, and it's a country that, despite it having to spend this year, it'll be 20%, but on a regular year, 10.2% of the GDP on military, on security. It's a modern miracle that it even survives economically with all of the threats and the pressure. But what's happened is in that incredible land, you've produced a startup nation. You've produced a nation that's at the cutting edge of biotechnology, of cyber defense. And you've also had an incredible reawakening of, I'll give you an example. There are more people today in Israel doing serious study of biblical texts, of Talmudic texts, of rabbinic texts throughout the years. And all of this is happening in a world where they're threatened by the Shia Caliphate, by Iran and its 6 proxies, in a world that they have more challenges in terms of defending themselves than any other nation on earth. It's something that miraculous is an understatement. It's a magical place. Now, the downside of that is when you have a society that lives under those kind of pressures, it takes its toll on people, and they become tough. They become very, very leery. They become wary because literally every day they have to look around them. Is this person a terrorist? Is this person going to kill my child? And that's the world they live in, and that does take its toll on people. But with all of the challenges, these are wonderful, wonderful people. They're kind people. They're generous people. They're fun. They're a fun group of people, and it's an exciting place because these are Moroccan immigrants. These are Ethiopian immigrants. These are from Germany. These are from Lithuania. This one came from South Africa. They come from all over the world, and they bring an incredible diversity. I apologize for just rambling on, but it's a magic place.
It is. I concur. I 100% concur, and I recognize that the most hospitable people I have ever met in the entire world, I have met in Israel. I mean, there's just no question about it. It is a magical place. It is extraordinary. When we come back from a very brief break, if you would be so kind, I think it would benefit people to hear what happened on November the 4th at the Friends of Israel Defense Forces fundraising gala. I think it would help people to hear what is happening in the United States of America, not only to Jews, but to those who support the state of Israel. Would you be willing to tell us that story?
When you say November 4th, you're referring to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I'm referring to what happened in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Happy to share.
Okay. Rabbi Steve Weil is with us. He's the CEO of the Friends of Israel Defense Forces. And they recently had a gala that had been scheduled long before the events of October the 7th in Israel. But you need to hear what happened when people gathered in Silicon Valley for a gala event. That's up next here on Mornings with Carmen. Thanks for listening to the podcast of Mornings with Carmen. As you know, this is a rebroadcast of the live radio show carried on the Faith Radio Network. There's a lot going on at Faith Radio, tons of free resources just waiting for you and for you to share with others at myfaithradio.com. How does that all happen? Well, it happens through listener support. So Faith Radio, Mornings with Carmen, all available because of listener support from listeners, well, just like you. If you're a supporter, thank you so very much. If you'd like to become a supporter today, just visit myfaithradio.com. And again, thanks for being a part of what we do every day at Mornings with Carmen. All right, I want you to imagine for a moment that you have made plans to attend a fundraiser for an organization that you support. You've gotten all dressed up. You recognize that the event is no longer going to have the celebratory sense that it would have had even 2 months earlier. But because of the events of October the 7th in Israel, the event which you are attending in early November 2023 in Silicon Valley is going to be a time of shared grief and a time when you are going to come together with other people who love Israel and are concerned about the events unfolding in the Holy Land. And while you are approaching the event, you recognize that many, many others have gathered to not only protest the event, but to seek to do you physical and personal harm, pelting your car with rocks, requiring that you be protected as you enter a facility that should otherwise be a safe place to gather with others in the United States of America. That's the beginning of the conversation of what happened during the Friends of Israel Defense fundraiser, their gala event in early November in San Carlos, California. Rabbi Steve Weil is the CEO of that organization. Steve, what was it like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually, took an Uber there, and so I got out and was able to walk and see in the eyes. First of all, the police had riot gear. I'm not used to seeing police looking like they're in military gear with helmets and life, bulletproof vests, etc. It was very sad. I felt bad for the police. Secondly, you had a barricade, so you had a situation where there were two entrances to the facility. It was an aviation museum, and one of them had to be shut down. You could see in their eyes, there was just vicious hate in their eyes, and they're screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is another way of saying they're going to annihilate the Jews. It's a synonym for annihilation of the Jews. There's zero tolerance to have a Jew or a Christian living in that land. Christians and Jews are infidels. But it just, to see the hate, these people, I don't want to say I'm not God. I don't know what's in a person's heart. But I'm used to seeing humanity in people's eyes. I'm used to seeing humanity on their face. And I just saw an evil, a satanic, there was no humanity on these people's faces. And it's just, is that really, can America tolerate groups like this who are out to annihilate and eradicate anyone from living on the land, which is before Islam started in the 7th century? The Jews have been around for 4,000 years, going back to Abraham and Sarah. Christianity is over 2,000, it's 2,000 years old. Just that kind of hatred, in that is tolerated in quote unquote Silicon Valley, which is quite a liberal place in this country. It's not the America that we cherish. It's not the America we love. And these people, they've just taken the gift of freedom. They've taken the gift that America has given them, and they've turned it and used it and manipulated it for hate, for evil. It's very sad.
So, Rabbi Weil, one of the things that the protesters were alleging is that the Friends of Israel Defense Forces, you're arming the military. So instead, let's talk about what you actually do.
Yeah.
What do the Friends of Israel Defense Forces? What are the Friends of the IDF? What are you actually doing?
On a regular year, We provide
Well,
transformation.
sure. Let's talk about a regular year, and then we'll talk about these very irregular times.
We're the GI Bill. We provide transformational educational solutions for soldiers. 50,000. We don't know how many soldiers are in the IDF. It's classified, but let's speculate it's around 185,000 between commanders and soldiers. 50,000 of them are coming from different levels of poverty. We fund the welfare for those soldiers and their families. We fund their education. Those who don't have a high school education, we fund that. Those who can get into university, we fund that. Those who can get into a professional training program to become an electrician, to become a programmer or an auto mechanic, we fund that. We fund there's special programs that allow people on the spectrum of autism. It's all about education, welfare, spirituality. Anything that's a non-military building, we fund. For instance, infirmaries, synagogues, gymnasiums. It's not a military organization. We say that on the front page of our website. And during the war, from the time that October 7th it's called, I would say get calls every day, but some days 2-3 times a day from the general staff. We have a campaign right now, 100%. Every penny goes straight to the Army. There's no overhead. And we're funding mobile hospitals, blood plasma, EKGs, X-ray machines, hygiene needs of the soldiers. We're funding these operational ambulances that on the one hand are four-wheel drive. They're bulletproof. They've got bulletproof metal on them. But on the other hand, they have to have a chassis almost like a Range Rover, because even though they're going off-road to pick up wounded soldiers, you got people with IVs and blood transfusions in them. They have to have a special chassis. I can go, there's hundreds of things that we fund, but not a one of them is military. They're all humanitarian. They're all the primary, most urgent needs that the Army calls us with daily, things that are not in the budget of the Army, but because of the war, there's a necessity. That's what we're funding.
Yeah, I wanted to give you the opportunity to say that and to say it out loud, and so thank you for doing so. I think that when you talk about the challenges that military individuals face, we imagine here in the United States that the needs of the military are paid for, totally by the military. But the challenge when people are called up overnight to come to the front lines, they don't necessarily even have the boots they need. And they don't necessarily have all the things in place at home to be able to walk away. So I have a friend from high school who she and her family made Aliyah, and they live in Israel most of the time, although they're back here in the States now. But both of her kids, are in the IDF and were reservists, but obviously answered the call to go. And I mean, Jamie was like, they don't have the things that you would imagine. They just don't. They don't have the things you would imagine that they should have. Yeah.
They tripled the size of the Army in 30 hours. Literally went from, let's say it's 185,000, they went to 550,000. Look, the first week, besides the blood plasma, we were funding hygiene. You had young women who went up there, didn't take enough supply.
Needed the things they needed. Yeah.
So it's incredible, though, what happened, how in 30 hours they tripled the size of the Army. And obviously 2/3 of them went to the northern border because the existential threat is from the Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. It was just, from a logistical point of view, that also was almost a miracle. They've canceled the university. They're going to reopen university in December, late December. But I'm not even sure that they're going to be able to do that, because most of the university students right now are either in Gaza or they're on the northern border with the call up. Yeah.
Well, what is going to be required after the end of this, whenever that comes? We just recognize, Steve, that this is going to be a long-term recovery of the individuals who are in the IDF. Those of us who have received home our own U.S. soldiers, have a son who did 2 tours in Afghanistan. They come back different than when they left. You know that. I know that. And so the Friends of the IDF is going to have a long road ahead. And so thank you for what you're doing now. Thank you for what you've done in the past.
Just on that issue.
Yeah.
They've They've already told us to start preparing $35 to $40 million just for whether for PTSD therapies, for other therapies, physical therapies, as well as therapies for the bereaved families. There's already 375 families that have lost a husband, a son, a brother, and there's going to be a lot of emphasis on trying to make them whole emotionally, make them whole psychologically, so that those who fought in these battles will be able to function as husbands, as fathers, to be able to function in society. And they really care. They care about the emotional health as well as the physical health of these soldiers.
That's so important. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again.
It was a blessing and an honor to be with you.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask you to bless us as you depart, and you may do so in Hebrew if that's most comfortable?
Yeah. If I could share what we call the Birkat Kohanim, the blessing that the educators, the Kohanim, the priests who are our educators give to us, in terms of our financial welfare, our spiritual and intellectual welfare, our growth as human beings, and our psychological welfare. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. God should make you successful, and the success that you have should be protected, shouldn't be lost. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. God should enlighten your eyes and show his countenance, that you should grow spiritually, intellectually, and perceive the depths and the beauty of the values, of the godly values that we live our life by, both philosophically and morally and ethically. And the final blessing, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. God should turn to you and give you, the word shalom means peace, but it means from being that you should be whole, complete, emotionally, psychologically. You should be healthy in the wealth that God gives you, the knowledge that he gives you, the insight that he gives you should be in a context of a healthy, psychologically emotional state as a family, as a community. Please, God, to all of our friends, to all those who support Israel, who care for her soldiers, we can't thank you enough.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a blessing. And thank you for blessing us today with your presence and with this conversation and with the blessing of the Lord. Friends, you are listening to Mornings with Carmen. When we come back, we're going to be talking with John Van Sloten about his book, God Speaks Science. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. All right, this is going to be a fun conversation. John Van Sloten is here. He brings to us God Speaks Science, what neurons, giant squid, and supernova reveal about our Creator. John, welcome to Mornings with Carmen.
Hey, Carmen, thank you for having me.
All right, what do you want us to know about how God speaks through, what you're calling science, but through the created order itself?
Yeah, a good delineation there. Science is only the tool with which we can exegete and understand and more fully read and know the nature of creation. But those are separate things. Science is a created thing, created by God, I believe, to help us unpack his revelation through creation. But to your question, what do I want us, and assuming us being Christian believers, to know? The Bible teaches very clearly that God made everything. The Bible also teaches very clearly in the New Testament that everything came into being in, through, and for Christ. John chapter 1, 1-3, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17. Read those passages. Unequivocal that everything that came to be through the person of Christ. If that is true, that God made it all, and he made it all through Jesus, then it's not a huge leap to believe then what we know, how God reveals God's self through creation, might lead us to the person of Christ, to an experience of the mind of Christ. Johannes Kepler, a great physicist and philosopher and mathematician, believed that centuries ago that he was thinking God's thoughts after God as he was doing his work as a scientist. And you don't have to be a scientist to do that kind of math. And that's really what my book is about. I'm a non-scientist writing about interviewing scientists and learning from scientists about creation in ways that has helped me know God more, know the God of the Scriptures more through what God is self-revealing through creation.
So I like that you describe yourself as a non-scientist, talking with scientists, interviewing scientists in God Speaks Science. Let's talk about those conversations. Tell us about one person that you met and what you thought the conversation was going to be about, but maybe how it surprised you.
I met Dr. Masaki Hayashi. He's a geoscientist, a Canada Research Chair at the University of Calgary, thinking that he would help me understand the nature of the Bow River, which runs through our city here in Canada, Calgary, and had a whole bunch of ideas.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Because I, for the first time in my life, got to visit Calgary this past summer, and so it like immediately leapt to my mind what you just described and what you're talking about. And I went down there to the Stampede area and saw where the river cuts through, and then went way up onto the top of the hill so we could get a better perspective. And so, speak on, my friend, about the Bow River.
No, but you're illustrating why one, as a faith leader, me, but as a human being, would even talk about what a river says. The nature of a river would say about the mind of Jesus, through whom a river was made. It becomes something that's there in your life. People walk by the river, they know the river, they remember the river. Anyway, I'm meeting with Dr. Hayashi and had a few ideas about, what makes up the waters of the river and what are the sources. And I thought that's what I would end up talking with him about and then preaching about. But he ended up sharing a discovery that he'd made. He was doing research on a high mountain lake in the Rocky Mountains here, right at the tree line. And he was noticing that the outflows from the lake were significant, but the inflows coming off the surface of the Rocky Mountain, they weren't adding up. Why was there so much water going into that lake and then going out to supply the Bow River? And he discovered that mountains, this is the first time any geoscientist in the world has sort of verified this, 20 years ago, discovered that mountains above the tree line hold water. They're like, in his words, a big bucket that has a slow leak in it that lets water out slowly in times when there are early snow melts or not enough rain, pardon me, or snowpack, and they kind of allow the river to have water longer into the season. So there's this beautiful geological grace that, as a theologian, I immediately heard all the passages. I remembered the story of Moses striking the rock, and water coming from the rock, and passages in the Psalms and the prophets that reference that story, that God is a God who provides water out of a rock. And of course, put that together with his discovery that actually mountaintops do hold water in a providential kind of way. And now my wife and I, every time we drive along the Bow River into the Rocky Mountains and see all those mountains above the tree line, we go buckets and we think about God's grace. And we know that if God has got that in mind and thought to think far ahead, right, in a warming world, that there's a little provision there, he's got us in mind and things are going to be okay.
So beautiful. JohnVanSloten.com is the website. God Speaks Science, what neurons, giant squid, and supernova reveal about our Creator. Tell us about the nature of tree branches and wound healing.
Yeah, another beautiful kind of connection. And for all of these, it's not just God through creation and not connecting it to the scriptures. It's seeing God in creation because God has revealed himself to me and to us through the Bible. John Calvin talks about wearing the scriptures like a pair of glasses. And when you know Jesus through the Bible, you then have more with which to see and focus on Jesus in creation, or recognize his moves or his thinking or his way of being. And so tree branches are a natural, right? Jesus had his own. Jesus used creation in his parables to teach people truth, the mysterious truth of the kingdom. I am the vine, you are the branches. So I imagine they might have been standing near a vineyard when that happened. So he's pointing to this thing. So knowing that parable, I went to a plant scientist and asked the question, what's the ideal tree and branch connected? How do trees and branch, what's the ideal way to be a branch? Because I figured if the science could show me what that is, I'd have more with which to understand what it means to remain in Jesus and to abide in him, as the parable asks us to do. So I'm talking with the plant scientist, and he goes, wrong question. I said, what do you mean wrong question? Well, there is no ideal. There are as many ways for a branch to be a branch as there are different plants and different environmental conditions and different times and different levels of sunlight and different levels of water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just struck me, like my whole faith walk, I've tried to, and maybe inordinately so, and maybe in a way that was kind of restricting my life or paralyzing me with a bit of anxiety, try to figure out what's the way to abide in you perfectly and to be a branch, because I do want that, and I want to know you more, and I want to bear fruit in my life. To then hear that how I'm going to be a branch may look quite different than how Carmen is and all the other billions of people on this planet. There could be as many ways to be a branch as there are people, and all of us, of course, abiding in one source, one place where we find sustenance and wisdom and knowledge for life. But the freedom, the sense of exhale, okay, there's a way for me to branch out. There's a way for me to reach toward the light and grow my leaves and bear fruit. That is maybe, in God's infinite wisdom, uniquely me, that fits. And that honors God because it fits, because I'm imaging him the way he made me to.
Same root, same vine, very
Same
different
root.
branches.
Yeah, right.
Very
Yeah,
different
take it right
branches.
back.
This is that unity, unity and diversity business. That there's unity, like we're all branches, we're all leafy, we're all producing fruit, but there's absolute unlimited diversity in that. In the same way that God didn't have to make more than one color of green, like right there, there didn't need to be more than one shade of green, and yet, when you look at the side of a mountain, there's literally an endless number. And when you go to a different part of the world, you're like, oh, and the myriad shades of green I've seen in that place are different than the shades of green I see here. And it's just, it's absolutely incredible. Hey, we have to take a very, very brief break. We're going to continue our conversation with John Van Sloten here in just a moment. God Speaks Science is the book. JohnVanSloten.com is your one-stop place to connect with John and find out all the other cool things he's talking about and preaching on. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. We'll be right back. 150 million people actively use one particular app every month in the United States of America. I want that to be the Faith Radio app. How about you? If you're wondering how you could be encouraged in your faith at any time, anywhere, well, I got good news for you. There's literally an app for that. You can listen to Faith Radio live, any show on demand, no matter where you are at any time of the day or night. Download the free Faith Radio app right now. It's super easy. Just text the word app to 877-933-2484 and click the link. Let's connect faith to life. John Van Sloten is engaging God everywhere. That's what it says on his website at johnvansloten.com. He's a Calgary-based writer, teacher, and pastor. He's passionate about helping us engage God everywhere. So he has been preaching dozens of creation Bible-based sermons on topics like radiation therapy and DNA repair mechanisms and river hydrology and tree branches and human needs and giant squid and supernovas. And he brings us now a book that is around those same topics. God Speaks Science. And in it, he has conversations with, frankly, scientists who take us on this incredibly joy-filled expedition that maybe they didn't even know they were embarking on themselves. So, John, maybe we move now to, you want to talk about supernovas or you want to talk about fossils? Either one. I'm good with either one.
Supernovae. This
Oh,
is every
see, I
time.
knew
No, no,
I
no.
was
But no,
I
no.
knew I was pronouncing it
It
incorrectly when I
always
saw
comes
that
up. Like,
E.
is it
I saw that E at the end, and
supernova?
I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Yeah, thank you.
Singular supernova, plural supernovae is what I've been taught, but that may be a Canadian thing. So yeah,
That
I
was
was
very
I was
gracious. That was very gracious of
thanks.
you. Yeah.
Thank you. I was down at a workshop in Houston, and somebody who ran the Hubble Space Telescope was giving a presentation on a person of faith, talking about the nature of the universe. And I left, amazing images and yeah, to see all these galaxies. But I left a little disappointed because I was wondering, yeah, okay, the universe is like this. So what does that say about the mind of Christ, of the thoughts of God? And we never really got to answering that question. But I was complaining about that to another scientist who was walking back to the hotel with me, and she said, well, I'm a Mars rover researcher, and I thought about this question. And when I think about space, I think about supernovae and the death and resurrection of stars, basically. And only through the death and resurrection of stars forming and then blowing up and creating more and more matter until we had all the elements to fill out our periodic table, was life even able to be. So this was the mechanism that science is saying God used to make enough matter to make us up, that Jesus used to make enough matter to make up what would one day be his earthly body when the incarnation happened up. Jesus thought up a process that played out in the universe that eventually ended up in his human body that is now God with us through Christ. Amazing. Anyway, death and resurrection, and that idea happening in via the making more out of matter through supernovae was what I connected with. And I remember when she explained it to me, and I said, well, no surprises there, right? That a God who thought that, the salvific way, the mystery of death and resurrection in and through literally the person of Christ, that would be the way that all things are made new and the cosmos is renewed. That same dying, resurrecting kind of thing is echoed or reflected in or foreshadowed in how supernovae play out 45 times per second right now, as your listeners are hearing us talk. It's a kind of like, yeah, that's how God works. That's how Jesus works, right? Death and resurrection. And this time, through the book of creation, God's first book, written long before the Bible was written, God was already presaging, foreshadowing that death and resurrection can make more out of things and more out of things and more out of things and us.
Andrew Peterson said here yesterday that, in order to tell the story he wanted to tell, like, God had to make what he made. Right, you had to have a world, and you had to have this world, and it had to work this way in order for the story, the redemptive cosmological arc, to actually find a place and a space. And I thought that is connected to the conversation we are having now. I am wondering how engaging God through not just creation, but via science, like how has it changed you?
It's in many ways changed everything. As I was pointing to earlier, I can't walk by the river now. I can't look at the mountains now. I can't look at a tree branch now. My life is increasingly surrounded by parables. My very body, I preached on the biomechanics of the human knee and the nature of the kidney and neural stress-reducing mechanisms and DNA repair mechanisms. Your DNA is repairing itself in your body trillions of times per second. Every second that we've been conversing, your DNA has, by the grace of God, unmerited by us, been saving our bodies and doing repairs on our DNA so that cancers, Lord willing, cancers aren't developing in our bodies. But if I think about it, it's overwhelming. I can't go anywhere without recognizing or seeing something that is a reminder, a pointer to who made everything, who made me, who's making everything new, who's making me new. We sang a hymn in the church I grew up with that had a line that says, "He speaks to me everywhere." And I sang that as a kid growing up when I was learning catechism and attending, not hearing these kinds of sermons. But now I feel like I'm living it. This is our Father's world, and through our listening ears, all nature sings, and round us rings the music of the spheres. It's true, and again, not just in creation. This is not a hippy dippy crystals kind of engaging God through all things. It's not. And I separate God as creator, Christ as the one through whom things are made from the creation. They're not the same thing. God's not a tree, but with the right boundaries and the right theological foundation, one that for 2,000 years has been talked about in the church, I live a life that it's like a museum filled with paintings and creation. Speaking, connecting to the scriptures. And that's where the magic, the beauty in this is that something in a mountaintop echoes something from the Old Testament repeated in a psalm, and the lordship of Christ over all of those things. There's a moment. That's where I'm definitely not a totally rational empirical thinker, but a bit of a mystic, a moment where you're the Lord. You're the Lord over all of that? Really? You did that then, way back when, and then with the people of Israel, and this now in my life, and it all sort of comes together in the lordship of Christ over everything. The moment at best, it's like I step into it, and for a second, he pulls back the veil, and you get to see a bit of his thinking, feel a bit of his presence.
And then once you've seen, you can't unsee, which is just so incredible. And
you can't unsee.
Then we're forever changed. John, we have to leave it right there. I hope you've enjoyed yourself enough to come back.
Well, I would love to.
Okay,
you can hear it. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I know. So, and people listening are excited as well. And so this is the kind of feast we want to have more often here. And so thank you in advance for the next conversation. Maybe we'll talk about the theology of horses or the theology of wood or, or knees or bees. All right. It's all amazing. John Van Sloten is the author. God Speaks Science is the book. We're totally out of time today. That does not surprise you because, we like to fill our time together with wonderful discourse and opportunities to glorify God. So I want you to turn your eyes today to the things of the world and see God in the creation that he has made. Let him speak to you in those falling leaves or that fresh fallen snow. Let him speak to you through the things that he has made. All creation certainly groans with eager longing for man's redemption. And so what does creation have to say to us today? And how can science speak to you of the things of God? That's a good conversation for us to be having with each other and with emerging generations. All right, that's all we've got. Have a great day, and God bless. Thanks for listening to Mornings with Carmen LaBerge. Podcasts like this are available because of your support. If it's important to you to hear things that encourage your faith, click the link in the show notes to give now. And thanks.